The movie that Scream made fun of. The thing they built that whole franchise off of was like, look at all these stereotypes. Cat people. Hey everyone, welcome to Eerie Horror Stories, and tonight we're coming at you with a vintage horror movie review, synopsis, whatever you want to call it. We're talking about an old one, Cat People. It came out in 1942 and it stars Simone Simon. What it's about is this woman, Irina, immigrates to the United States. She goes to New York, basically living her life, and she's likes to go to the zoo and sketch, the panthers and things like that. A little different, a bit of an unusual hobby there, but that's what I guess they did back in the 40s. This man meets her, his name is Oliver, and he's just like, gotta have her. Oliver he's a good guy. There's really nothing going on in this film where you're just thinking ulterior motives from him. It's not like Obsession where, you got this creepy weirdo. Oliver, he's a stand-up, well-to-do, good guy. And he plays his cards right and he gets her to marry him. She kind of reveals to him, hey, by the way, there's a curse. If he gets to hit that, she's going to turn into a panther and she's going to eat him alive. Some knights or noblemen or something came and cursed the village, and she's descended from that curse. You can tell Oliver's kind of like, right, okay. Now, she tells him before they get married. He seems to think, I want to get married with you anyways, so maybe if we get married, you're not going to eat me, right? And she's like, no, I'm serious. You're going to die. And so he basically, he's kind of not buying it after a certain point, and he's just kind of like, okay, but for real, how long do I got to wait after getting married? She wants to. I think that part is very clear, and she kind of wants to do all this stuff too. It's just she can't. She fully believes in this curse and its power. Oliver not so much, so he suggests that she goes to a psychiatrist or a therapist. She's talking to this dude. He's trying to explain, it's trauma, it's childhood fears, that's what's causing all of this. And she tries, but she's like, no, it's not trauma, it's a curse from hundreds of years before I was born. And then he starts breaching his own ethical boundaries as a therapist. Things don't really start escalating until Oliver starts hanging out with Alice. And once that happens, Irina's not really chill no more, and she turns into a much more predatory stalker. There's this sort of dance between predator and prey. It just builds and builds and builds. There's a specific scene in this film that this movie is famous for, and for good reason. Now, before we really get more into detail about this film, we need to understand the context of how it's made. I'm talking about is the Hays Code. And the Hays Code between the early 30s and the mid 60s was sort of the rating system applied in a different manner. Kind of meant was you couldn't do certain things on camera at all. And that included a lot of very basic moral imagery. So things like the bad guy can't win. The love interest always sticks with the hero. The hero can't suffer pain. It's like basic things like drugs and prostitution, just no bueno. And that is a confine that a lot of horror kind of struggled with more than just other genres of film that were probably a little easier to adhere to that. Because in horror, people die. There's going to be blood and guts. There's going to be curses and evil. And the Hays Code is like, we don't want any of that. This is basically like Margaret Thatcher. And Cat People is already making a critique on how horror under the Hays Code was kind of made in the last decade. If we look at it from back then, the 30s was kind of when a lot of monster horrors, those real early, classic ones like Frankenstein and Dracula. That's when those were, hitting the silver screen and getting, big and becoming the first kind of group of horror characters that the collective conscious remembers. At that time, it was really, people were starting to grow out of it because it's like, hey, monsters aren't scary. The monsters aren't even real. This is stupid. I can't feel afraid of this. Scare me with something real. That same concept applies to today. We see it a lot in the 2000s when Saw hits the scene and it suddenly becomes blood and guts all the time and it's torture porn. Between like 2004 and 2009, everyone's getting sliced up. And I mean more than like a slasher film. People are getting sliced up. We see that in like House of Wax and I think Hostel. Turistas, I think, was one of them. There's a lot from that time. And we get this major backlash and horror changes in the 2010s. Get things like, Drag Me to Hell, The Conjuring, Sinister, right? We just get all these kind of spooky supernatural films suddenly that are just like, oh, like these are spooky, right? They're not violent and, like making me quease. They're spooky. And back in the late 30s, people are starting to come out of this monster trope and think to themselves, we want something spooky. We don't want something that's just monsters, because none of us believe that stuff anymore. We're not kids anymore. We've seen it grace the screen already. Cat People is sort of playing in this, and they really want this movie to be scary in its dialogue. That's not always the best thing to do because some films do it too much and it loses its fear factor. But this film is really articulating it, and they put so much into these little moments that when you take that step back and kind of remove yourself from the confine of, what was it like in that time, you can see so many strands of influence from this movie over the modern contemporary horror movie. Some of the genres that we can kind of bring up when talking about the films that this influence can really include this wide range. One, there's a deep tie into kind of psychological horror with this movie, and we really get that through The Therapist. The Therapist is giving us all these reasons, trying to explain, what is horror, where are these fears coming from. We can really project that and see it today kind of growing out. One that I think is really similar would be Shutter Island. I think Hereditary has a lot of similarities here that it can draw from. We get a scene of Irina where she totally breaks down sobbing in a bathtub. In Hereditary, there's also a lot of scenes of sobbing. One scene where Oliver picks up a big plank of wood and it looks like a cross. By this point in this movie, I'm like, none of the symbolism in this movie is an accident. Clearly, holding a cross, they show you what these original people look like, and they're like crusaders. Cross thing isn't, out of left field or nothing. That really reminded me of The Exorcist. They're holding up the crosses, the rosaries, and power of Christ compels you. It's a really famous scene from The Exorcist. Leads to, the best part of that movie is, when the priest sacrifices himself to save someone. It's just an imagery sort of thing, but it's still there. It's incredibly easy to just connect these dots with this movie. This also has a lot of slasher elements in it. The way that Irina is constantly hiding in shadows. During the second half of the film, after Alice shows up, Irina's all black. She is always in the shadows. She is always tiptoeing. She's acting like a cat. She's acting like a cat about ready to pounce the entire time. They make an entire scene out of that, the alleyway scene. Where we see Alice walking home, and right behind her is Irina, and we only see their feet, and we see them kind of going in and out of shadows, and it goes under a bridge, and all you hear is the click of their heels. It just elevates because you can kind of hear one speeding up out of fear and the other speeding up out of pursuit. And it's super intense. And then suddenly, we get a bus, and it's a jump scare, and it's got a loud horn. And it's called Luton Bus, the Luton Bus. It's the original jump scare. The way that they're able to have this super suspenseful, moment and then shatter it with something mundane. We see that all the time. And we also see that when the scare isn't mundane. And it's something I can only imagine help Alfred Hitchcock in the same time, because he was already an accomplished filmmaker at this time. He probably saw this movie, went, wow, that's a really neat, suspenseful scene. And then 10, 15 years later, House on Haunted Hill, and he gets the idea to make Psycho. The other original slasher that inspired Black Christmas, that inspired Halloween. We can just see them all going, it's a ripple effect. Cat People, with that scene, they're trying to create a new realm of horror. It's not monsters anymore, and we can't show anything because of the Hays Code. So we can only make you, feel fear through dark shadows, sounds, and sudden moments where there's nothing there. That resonated with viewers, and it still does. One of the biggest criticisms of horror today is jump scares. But when a jump scare works, it works really well. Just ask all the people that watched Obsession, with the scene with the window in the car, or Where Evil Lurks with the dog. A jump scare, when is done well, something's going to happen. And in Cat People, you're watching this like, ooh, she's going to get her. She's going to get her. This film, in review, I would say was a massive influence on just everything horror. The first time I watched it, honestly, it kind of went over my head. It was just so much talking, and I wasn't feeling the vibe yet. But on the second watch through, I was really kind of like, wow, okay, I think I understand what really makes this film unique in a sea of really confined horror that was the 30s and 40s. If you've seen Cat People, let me know down in the comments below what you thought of it and how you think about some of these points raised up and what you think it did to influence horror. We'll see you again next time on Eerie Horror Stories Vintage Horror Reviews.